Welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed for intelligent people where we discuss issues facing. I've stuffed it up.
Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin.
I'm Charlene, and this is our week in review.
Yes, so Charlene doesn't normally do the introduction because she's normally on for the week in review where we just freewheel and discuss. But she did point out that we're now on Spotify, and thus we should be introducing ourselves to those that aren't as familiar with us. We'll get there with the intro. But for everyone listening on Spotify, thank you for tuning in. So how are you this week?
Good. It's been a busy week. Just thing happening. I don't know if people know this. I don't know if I've ever mentioned it, but I teach body combat as just a hobby. So I teach group fitness classes. And a part of that is I want to get my certificate 3 in fitness so I can teach different types of classes, like that be HIIT, circuit training, boxing, all like. So I've almost finished it. Thank goodness. It's taken me 2 years, which is a long time. Normally people complete these in 6 months, but I decided, it'd be great to do that while I do a full-time degree. But yeah, it's getting there. So yeah. Feel pretty successful. What about you? How was your week?
Yeah, well, good. Well, I mean, first of all, just on your work. So it is a big thing where people. I find it's very common in Australia. Like they'll be doing their main kind of area of work in terms of study or research. So they'll do their honours degree or they'll be doing their masters or whatever, and then they'll have like a side bit of qualification at TAFE. It's very common. So they might be doing photography or craft work or textiles, and in Charlene's case it was body combat exercise.
Group fitness.
So what is body combat anyway?
So I think if you've ever been to a gym and there's like group fitness classes, there's this program called Les Mills and they have like pre-choreographed classes. So if you go to any gym with that, you'll basically get the same thing, and people like that familiarity because then they can engage the program or work a bit harder. Plus it has like a lot of great moves and then it coordinates with music. So it's fun. Like it's really fun to exercise. So that's basically it. But yeah, I did it for group fitness because I enjoy exercise, and what'd be great is that you're getting paid to exercise. So that knocks two things out. And I think it's a rewarding experience, you know. I'm with my participants. You've never been in my class, and one day I'll bring you to my class. But
there is going to be some bet that I'm going to have to lose in a big way, and a lot's going to be staked on this from the other side before that ever happens.
Yeah. Definitely a lot of cardio, It is tiring because you're on stage, you're performing, quote unquote, and but then you're also encouraging them, and then you're trying not to look like you're dying because you're meant to be the fittest one in the room because you're teaching. But there are some weeks I'm like, I need to wait, guys, just survival minutes. But it's great fun. It's good fun. And there's a lot of benefits again to physical activity. You know, concentrate better. Like I think a lot of people use like group fitness or PT as a side hustle. Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, I'm definitely not against exercise. I think it's an extraordinarily important thing, physical activity. But I am much more a weights guy myself. I like. I really don't like sweating that much when it comes to exercise. I like just feeling that the muscles are working and that like I'm getting really, really sore in various parts of the body without losing breath. It's one of those things.
Yeah, it is different type
Maybe
of
swimming I would probably enjoy, like in terms of cardio, because it's like you're not sweating, you're surrounded by water, you're constantly being cooled. But I don't know.
I'm really bad at swimming. I can't swim to save my life. I feel like when I try to swim, I just stay in the same spot.
Now, I want to stress, when Charlene says she can't swim, she's probably saying she can't swim by Australian standards. That's a very different thing. Like when you go around the world in different places, if you say you can't swim, that means you can't swim. Like you'll fall in the water and drown. Whereas in Australia, everyone's a fish. From a very early age, people are taught to swim. That's why, if it wasn't for Michael Phelps in the United States, we would just clean sweep the Olympic swimming events as we usually did, because every one of us has very familiar with water, unless you're the only person I've ever met in Australia who actually can't swim.
Well, like when I say I can't swim, it's like because my level I can't swim is like not being able to swim fast.
Yeah.
Like I can float, I can not drown.
Yeah.
And does that mean I can swim if I can not drown?
Yes, that's right. I mean, it'd be like, put it this way: you will get blank stares if you come to Australia and say you can't swim, because it's such a rare thing. It's like saying you can't walk, you know. But I agree with you. Like by Australian standards, I'm not like, you know, I can definitely endure big swirls and things like that at the ocean and massive waves and things like that. But I can't do great laps. Like if
yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah,
I just don't have that kind of that freestyle endurance.
Yeah, I like playing in the water on the edge. And you're like, okay, that's enough swimming. Oh, good.
But otherwise, I'm on keto, which now I didn't know what the keto diet was until Charlene mentioned it to me months ago.
I didn't put you back on keto, by the way. This was his idea.
Yeah, so she initially put me on keto. It was highly effective. And then I came off it and like I put on some muscle mass because of all the weights and everything, but I also put on some other mass.
Fat. Just say it. Tell it like it is.
My bones grew. And so I was like, well, maybe I should get back on keto. And for those that aren't familiar, keto is a diet of high protein, extremely low carbohydrates, no sugar.
And high fat.
And high fat, yeah. Although, like, in reality, because I like meat a lot, it's more protein than fat. So I'm a bit naughty in that respect. So in 1 week, or just over 8 days, I've lost 3.6 kilograms of weight. Now, some of that will be obviously water weight, but that unnerved me a bit. I have never ever lost that much. I think when I was really, really sick once and didn't eat for several days because I was super, super unwell, I would have lost something like that. But 3.6 kilos in a week, that's good, but weird. I won't be able to keep that up, hopefully.
Well, like I just kind of discouraged you from going back on keto. I was like, the idea for me.
That's just because you want me to eat all the good food at your birthday party. That's why. It's not even about my well-being. It's like, oh, it
is about your well-being.
Your diet inconveniences me.
It is about your well-being because keto for you is not sustainable. You're Italian. You like bread. You like carbs. You like pasta. Like it's not. And you like alcohol. Like, come on. I know the other week I was like, you should reduce your alcohol, but I didn't mean to ban it. Yeah.
Well, that's true. Yes. Well, thank you for appealing to my most decadent side. That part of me does thank you for your advocacy. However, the need for self-discipline, is holding up, but at least for the next little while. Then once I've hit like the body weight that I want to, then yes, I will slide back into all my bad ways, as inevitable.
They're not bad. We just have to make it better. Look, easy swaps, but yeah, I mean that could be an entire video in itself if people want to hear about it, of ways of losing weight without crash dieting.
So Charlene's a qualified nutritionist.
Yes,
for those that don't.
That was my bachelor's degree. It was nutrition and health promotion, and then a research year in public health. Yeah. Anyway, enough about us. This week, and you mentioned it before, tech censorship is going rampant. So the Australian government we'll talk about Google first. So the Australian government basically told Google, look, you got to pay our media outlets for their content.
Yeah, so it's kind of a strange...
Exchange.
Yeah, so as I understand it, it's a strange situation where, you know when you search in Google and you've got the little news tab, and then you go to the news tab and it has the list of all the local news articles from the different agencies. Well, obviously, the media companies don't get any money for that list, right? It's all appearing in Google's search results. And from Google's perspective, it's just they're showing up in the algorithm just like any other, search result would. And then if the Google ads that display when you see that list of various news articles, that revenue goes to Google. And in fact, for all online advertising revenue worldwide, I think it's something like 70% goes to Google, and then like another 20% goes to Facebook, and then the rest of it is split among everybody else. So it's
a severe monopoly.
Yeah, it is a severe monopoly. And what the Australian government, the ACCC, have said is you've got to negotiate with media outlets. If you display their stories in your search result in like a news style feed, then some of that Google advertising revenue that they receive needs to be shared with the content creators, the media outlets. Now, that's an interesting policy. I think there's a few complications with that. First of all, I think from Google's perspective, the benefit to the media outlets for being displayed so prominently in Google's algorithm is a benefit to the media outlet itself, that Google is providing its platform for free to the media outlets, and media is getting a huge amount of traffic by virtue of the fact that it's showing up prominently in Google search results. And then it's up to the media outlet to find ways to monetize those stories once they've reached their outlet's webpage.
So it's free exposure for them.
Yeah, that's the way Google looks at it. So if you then have to subscribe to that media outlet by paying money and so on, well, the way in which you get those subscribers is because people have found their way to you via Google. So that's an interesting perspective, but I think there's a bigger story to tell, which is that Google will very likely withdraw all news services like search results algorithms from Australia if this law goes through. And I would definitely say they're not bluffing on that. They've already done that in Spain. And because Australia does have...
What happened in Spain?
So in Spain, there was a law passed that said that Google had to pay a special form of tax. I don't know exactly the mechanisms of that, but it was a tax basically because it was displaying all these media outlets in its own search results, that Google had to pay a tax to the government for that, and whether or not that tax was distributed to media, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But Google said they don't want to pay that tax, so they simply stopped displaying those search results, so they didn't have to pay that tax. And I think that it's probable that Google will do the same thing in Australia, on the basis that the money that Google makes from its advertising is not going to be significantly impacted, because they'll say, look, people use Google because it's a good search engine. They don't just use it to access news. Those people are going to use it anyway, and therefore there'll still be the same exposure in terms of exposure to our advertising, and we won't have to be in any money sharing arrangement.
Is there another search engine people could go to for their news?
Well,
would this be a blanket thing for all search engines?
Well, that's another good question. So it's not clear to me. I don't know the answer to that question. I know that it's definitely targeted with Google and Facebook in mind, but that's probably because Google and Facebook gets the overwhelming majority of the revenue. It is true that Google and Facebook, use their monopolistic power in all kinds of nefarious ways, but Australia is in kind of a trendsetter position. We have historically introduced laws in Australia that other countries around the world have then copied. As I said in the video, plain packaging of cigarettes, but there are other things as well when it comes to certain patents and copyright legislation that was sort of copied around the world. The generic drug manufacturing, so-called ISDS provisions, like rejecting those, so where companies can sue governments for health promotion, things that they don't like. Well, Australia was pioneer in getting rid of those. So there's a lot of things that happen in international law and domestic law in other countries where they go, well, Australia's sort of piloted it. It worked there, therefore we want to do it here as well. And because of that fact, Google, I think, is very aware that if this legislation passes and if it's seen to be effective, then that could be very dangerous for Google. Because let's say the law passes, Google complies with that law, they say, all right, we'll enter into a negotiation with the media outlets for a shared model. And let's say they split it 50-50 or 60-40 or 70-30 or whatever they do. And the media outlets suddenly get a large number of revenue and then Google loses a ton of revenue. Well, that opens the floodgates for the rest of the world to be like, hey, I want our media outlets to have the same benefit that the Australian media gets. So you have to do the same thing. And that then just cuts worldwide into Google's revenue share, by hundreds of billions of dollars, which they're just not going to be willing to cop. They would much rather just cut the losses from Australia completely and say, look, this is what's going to happen to you if you pass legislation that forces us to share revenue with these media outlets for advertising that is arranged with Google on our own platform.
I'm so sick of being used as a guinea pig anyway. Like these media giants, like Google, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, they always use Australia first because we are a representative country for America. Like that, we always get like the beta testers and like, when the likes were hidden away in Instagram and like it came to Australia first because they didn't want to roll it out to the US. So, I mean, I'm more than happy to put pressure on them to see what happens.
Yes, but I think they're not stupid. That's the problem. I think what they'll do is simply go, okay, so you're telling us we have to negotiate with media outlets to share our revenue. Well, we'll just stop having media outlets in the search results. And they've already done that with the experiment, which is what I mentioned before. To 1% of users, they said, okay, let's see what happens if they don't get any news in their search results that's current. Do they still use Google? It's probably what they were testing. They were like, okay, if an Australian user doesn't have access to news via Google, what impact does that have on their Google usage and screen time? Okay. So they would have done that to 1% of the population as a sample. And with an idea of like, okay, if the government passes legislation that would force us into this revenue sharing arrangement, and we just, instead of complying with that arrangement, because that's too risky, because if it works and other countries are going to want to do it, we'll say, look, any country that wants to do this, that's fine. We'll simply pull the news from our feed, right? Customers won't get that anymore. It'll just be a negative customer experience. And the media outlets themselves will lose money because they won't get the exposure that Google provides them. That, it seems like an extremely spiteful strategy, but I think that Google executives will see that the consequence of not doing that, of not playing absolutely hardball and sending a message to whatever government around the world that would seek to do this, that the potential cost to the Google would be too great. So, so I think that's... Do
you know, like, the world be a better place if people are less greedy?
Yes, but Google is like any other company. Right. It used to have that wonderful "don't be evil" thing. I think it originally was made up of starry-eyed idealists who wanted to, promote the free and fair exchange of ideas and wasn't obsessed with the bottom line. But ultimately, Google has turned into any other major multinational corporation, and it exists to maximize the profitability of shareholders. Now, I actually prefer businesses to be greedy than to be virtuous. Okay. It's much more trustworthy if a business is greedy. But when businesses claim that they're trying to do social good, and that's their motivation, they often do extraordinarily damaging things. I think that's where tech censorship comes in. I think that's where pandering to particular groups and ideologies comes in, various social movements of dubious quality and repute, and also just the crushing of our stories. Like when we watch the various television shows and movies and things of the 90s and early 2000s and the 80s and before, what we see is really original storytelling, pioneering innovations in movie making. But now what we see is, remakes and 9, 8, 7 sequels of a particular franchise. And an extremely formulaic, mundane set of movie stories that have come out, the streaming things that all have to hit various intersectional boxes. That's because these companies are trying to be like, virtuous
Yeah, I might sound really young, but what was life before Google?
What was life before Google? The
Li-
before times.
Before times, like, did people literally, like, media outlets were just out there, I guess, in the physical world, right? Like, no, the phone wasn't a thing then, so.
So there's a few iterations. So before Google, there were other search engines. There was a plurality of search engines that people used. People didn't usually just rely on one. So Yahoo, Alta Vista, Ask Jeeves, like these were search engines that people would search for various results, knowing that each of them had different strengths and weaknesses, and often people would spend a bit of time searching for what it was that they were actually looking for. Whereas Google came along with just revolutionary algorithms and was just so much better than everybody else that they destroyed the competition pretty much straight away. Google was the new age. But before that, there were search engines. And then there were different forms of web browsers as well. Like there was, Internet Explorer for a while. There was the only main one. Before that, the first one that I ever used was Netscape, which I'd say is probably the first one that was popular. So the before Google, the internet was fragmented, if you like. So it was all the World Wide Web, but you didn't just have a one-stop shop. If the way in which you interacted with the web was through various things, instead of going through one door, which was Google, and it would open up to the rest of the world, you would be in the lobby faced with many doors, and you would decide which door you would go through, and eventually you would get to where you were going. So it didn't feel because to Google now is a verb, right? You say,
exactly.
I'll Google it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas before, you would never have said Yahoo it, right? You would be search for it, find it.
Find it, yeah. Interesting.
So that has certainly shifted. That everyone has been raised by Google in the younger ages. But for my ancient Methuselah ways, understand that there was a time before that where you didn't have that feeling. Also, the internet itself, but you have to understand, today you can run 5 or 6 different videos at like our Lithuanian audience, for example, crazy internet speed. But back in the day, you needed to use your phone line. People would have arguments with their parents about using the internet because it hogged the phone line. They couldn't make any telephone calls. And you would be reliant on very dodgy routers that made horrible noises, and the speeds for which you were running were 56k a second as opposed to the squillion gigabytes per second that people now have. So if you wanted to download a 5 megabyte file, that would take you a couple of hours, right? So it was people use the internet for much more mundane things like chat rooms. That was
MSN, I remember that one.
MSN, yeah, ICQ, and so it was a bit more innocent because it was also limited, right? You couldn't just scan the internet for everything. You had to focus your attention, and thus it was a bit more like going to a library where you specifically were looking for something. It was like a library that always had what you wanted, but you had to know what you were looking for. It's a bit like the way men go shopping, right? There's a common thing that a lot of people have studied. Women go shopping, and they kind of go browsing, and the shopping itself is often the activity, right? They'll go and buy stuff, but they might have something in mind that they want, but that's not going to preclude them from engaging with the shopping endeavor. Whereas guys will go straight to what it is that they want to buy it, take it home so they can play with it, right? So it's a different mentality, and I think the original internet was much more of that male shopping mentality where you know what you want, you get on there to find it because you only have a limited amount of bandwidth with which to do it, and then you did whatever it is you were doing. Whereas
now we basically live on the internet.
Yes,
people's lives are on here.
Yeah, and it really hasn't been for the better. I mean, people were happier before the internet. I know it's a weird thing to say, but people genuinely were. The average well-being of a human person was much higher because now I think there's a number of reasons for that. First, people were comparing themselves to reasonable standards. So, like, for example, if you were, the third or fourth most attractive girl in class, you were comparing yourself to 2 or 3 other people, right?
Mm.
Whereas if you're the third or fourth most attractive girl in class, you get online and you're comparing yourselves, usually within another 3 or 4 other people. It's not like you're browsing 70 million other women and being like, where am I on the totem pole? It's like you are looking at 3 or 4 other women, but they are so like the distance between you and them is so great in terms of, not you, Charlie, I'm the most attractive person in the world, but like the for people out there, they are comparing themselves in that way, and I think that's extraordinarily damaging because humans are naturally focused on the best. I think that's true for certainly male, how men appeal to women. So as people have rightly identified with our tournament aspect, women will go for the best of everything, right? So like if you're the best race car driver or the best horse rider or the best mechanic or the best whatever, if you're visibly the best of what you do, even if the women know nothing about it, they just know that you're the best, then they will assume that is an attractive person, right? And that's understandable. But what that means is if you're competing with everybody in the world, then everybody is going to come up short, basically.
It's too much choice as well, right? Like you just can't make a decision.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the real paradoxes of North Korea. So if people don't know, I've been to North Korea. I've spent a bit of time there. And not many people have. It's a strange place. It's extraordinary. But the weird thing about it is that most people are happy. Now, they're happy in large part because they don't understand the absolute deprivation and misery that their society is, right? So this is not me praising them in any way. It's a dark place. But every North Korean has one advantage over people in the West. Every North Korean knows that they've had 3 or 4 different choices in life. And if you only have 3 or 4 different choices, you can absolutely evaluate the pros and cons of every individual decision and know that you've done the absolute best for yourself. Okay? And that is an extraordinarily reassuring feeling. Imagine, Charlene, that everything that led you to this point was like you knowing that you've made the best decision for yourself possible, right? No matter where you are in life, if you knew that, you'd be very, very happy, right? Like you'd be like, okay, yeah, I don't have everything in the world, but I've done the best for myself that was physically possible. Because in the West, it's impossible to have that feeling because you have unlimited choices, right? Yeah, there's always that grass is greener. Oh, could I have been further ahead if I'd done X, Y, Z? Oh, I really wish I'd done that. So life is filled with regrets.
True. It's like, am I good enough? Like that. I think that's like a recurring thing in a lot of people when they have all these choices they made, and they're like, is this? And then it's the comparison thing, right? When you see people of similar age in a similar quote unquote life stage, you're like, why am I not there yet?
Yeah,
I'm like, I'm this age, arbitrarily this age, I should be there. Like we've done the same education or gone to the same university, like, and it's it is like I can see how that does foster sadness, and happiness. And I also remember, like, I was after you did the North Korean video, I was actually looking up. I kind of got into like North Korean defectors, the people who speak out about it, and they talk about their good things about North Korea as well, most bad, but good things too. And it's like they know their neighbors, they know their community. They are so excited because they could like knock on neighbors' door. They don't have phones, so they just walk in, and then they all like eat together and forage together. And yes, like they live in absolute poverty, but they're so connected with their community. And I don't know if we have that in the West. Maybe in pockets, but...
Yeah, it's really interesting, the dichotomy between Facebook and Twitter. So on Facebook, everybody just presents the best things for themselves, right? Like with some exceptions, which I'll get to, but most of the time, people are posting their holiday photos or their cute puppy dog photos or their humble bragging about their latest achievements.
And Instagram and LinkedIn. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, exactly. So that's them projecting the image. It's an image projection of the highlight reel of the best things in their life. Okay.
Yeah.
So all the stuff in between, everything that they're not posting up is the boring or horrible or traumatic or shameful things that they are experiencing. And then there is the Twitter sphere, which is people expressing their most deepest bile, right? Like things that that allows them to dehumanize other people, right? So Facebook dehumanizes oneself because you're only projecting those things that are positive, and Twitter is about dehumanizing others because what you're doing is you're saying you're taking someone's viewpoint, whether it's a political viewpoint or it can even be like, I like this character on a show, and you go, that's the worst character ever written, and blah blah blah, and people will get into that kind of fight. So people are never there's no space online to be oneself as you truly are. Now, there are exceptions. Some people use Facebook as kind of like a sympathy well, so they'll say something and get attention, where people are sending all kinds of well wishes and making comments and things like that. And sometimes that's valid. If people do experience real traumas and they might occasionally need to reach out to the public for help. But often there are people that are just perpetually negative and have become addicted to that kind of feedback. So it's a real shame because people online never see each other for who they truly are. Yeah,
and even like with short-term things like the TikTok, right? Like there's short videos, like a minute long maybe, and you can't express yourself in a minute video.
And the way in which people validate themselves is through how many likes they get. And even this channel, like we watch it and we go, okay, how many views does this get? Do we? And I think we did something that we made a decision that was really good. Like we decided to go, look, let's not ignore completely. We're adding value to an audience. We're not just here for ourselves by any stretch. So not ignore, but let's not get fixated on, this was more popular than this.
Yeah.
And, let's be ourselves. Let's talk about the content that we value and that we think adds the most value to the audience. And hopefully the audience over time, yes, they might be drawn to a particular subject matter, and that's what brought them to us, but they'll see value in the broader discussions that we have. And that's being authentic. It also means that we'll be able to maintain the passion for it a lot more. Yeah. And it was also the feedback we got from the audience when we asked them.
That was so nice.
Yeah. So it's a really, and then what I think most defines the internet age. So there are different emotions. I think the emotion that most defines the internet age is shame. Shame is a powerful feeling. So we feel guilty for what we've done. Right? Like, you feel like you've done something wrong, you feel bad for it, you ruminate on it, you go, I shouldn't have done that. You feel shame, not for what you've done, but for what you are. Okay. Shame is about feeling defective. Shame is about feeling like an imposter. Shame is like feeling like that other people don't see you for who you are, and if they did, they would reject you because no one who really understood you and your shortcomings would really want to give you that adulation. And Facebook in particular is made for that, right? People being able to project the best things of themselves while concealing those things they don't want other people to see. And everybody is in that chamber. And because everyone sees everybody else projecting, they mistake that projection for real life for other people. But realize the fraud in the projection that they put out themselves. And that's a very dangerous way to be, because if you're in a real community, if you're in a place where you are connected with other human beings, you see them as human beings. You don't people don't have the luxury of projecting the best of themselves all of the time. If you get to know someone well enough, you'll know their flaws. I got my friend who's the alcoholic. I got my other friend who's a woman who spends way too much on strip clubs, right? Like there's people out there who have these flaws, And I certainly have them in droves myself. We all have them. But because we are encouraged to project perfection, we are unable to, to have that online. Whereas in our real connections, in our real space, if you spend enough time with people, you'll see them for all their flaws and you'll still love them and accept them. And that is true connection, to be able to say and encourage them to be better and point out the problems. Like when someone, says, Crispin, you're putting on too much weight or whatever, that will encourage me to course correct behavior because I know they have my best interests at heart and I will, trust their judgment and reflect, at least give it due consideration. I won't outsource my decision making, but I just say, look, this person is saying something because they think it's good for me. Are they right? And they might be right. Whereas online, no one listens to anyone. Like, I mean, think of the time when someone accused you of something on Twitter and you're like, yeah, I believe that person, right? They were right. No, like people on Twitter, they don't have your best interests at heart. They have their own projection that they're trying to make. It's in the negative sense. In the Facebook, it's the positive sense.
Yeah.
But either side, they're not trustworthy. They're not trustworthy protagonists, right? They're not there because they're not making a comment because they really care about you. What they do is they care about themselves diminishing you. Whereas in real life, your real friends will say something not because they want to diminish you, but because they care about you.
That's a fair point. I know I'm just reflecting on do these platforms even have the capacity for us to be able to express ourselves fully? And, I look at places like YouTube that kind of have that capacity because it's kind of video. So you see the gray. Because when you're on a phone, you do the highlight reel, you can edit it, make a filter, has a cheesy comment. There's no tone, there's no emotion. There's emojis, I guess, but how much expression can you get through an emoji? And then whereas when you share on a video and you see the person animated and like you were in person, I think it's a different experience. It is one, and I guess then what's the alternative? Have more friends face to face.
I think
get real connection. Our online connections, are they not real?
Yeah. So look, there is something you can do. Okay. Yes, the environment sucks, and the social media tech giants are absolute disaster areas for everything that they do. But there is something you can do. You can talk online about something that you're ashamed of. Not ashamed of, that's a strong word, but like something that you yourself don't think is the best part of you, right? And if you do that, and I don't mean to do it for sympathy and certainly don't do it exclusively. No, you don't want to be the wet blanket. What you want to be is like a whole person. So talk about your successes with confidence and talk about the things that you go, you know what, I find that a problem with myself. I can do that here. So for example, I love poker. I'm a very serious poker player and I think I'm a pretty good poker player. But when I go to the casino, I'm waiting for a seat for a long time, and God, those table games look good. So I will go and gamble on things that I just know are the dumbest things in the world to do. I can't think of a less productive thing to do than hand your money to a casino, right? I just, in my intellectual day-to-day space, and then every time I do it, even if I win, right, which of course is, less often when you lose because it's the casino, you're I just come away with the greatest sense of how I can't reconcile that with the sense of myself as being very calculated, very controlled, the values that I would have as a poker player if you're doing plus EV decisions.
Oh my God.
Just because I'm bored, right?
We can't be friends.
And if your name isn't Charlene, you'll probably get good feedback, right? So do that online. Do that. And then you can have genuine connections. People will understand that. Oh, look, you fail. You've got problems. You've got things that you need to work on.
It's kind of funny how people like are so reluctant to talk about failure, and yet it's the biggest thing that people connect to. Like it's the strongest thing. Like because people all experience failure in some, well, they can relate to failure more than success because it happens more often. It's just not talked about.
Yes, I think that's another problem with the internet. I'll come back to this point immediately after this, but I think it's another problem with the internet, which is that because we can identify super successful people, right? And some of them even have personality, like Elon Musk, okay? There's a sort of a cult built up around these individuals, and that obsession with success has become such a characteristic of the internet age. Where now it was there before, but I think it really ramped that up to 11. And when it comes to failure, yes, people do connect more with people that said, "Look, I tried this and failed, and I did this and I sucked at it, and I really screwed this up." People do relate to that because that is most people. That is most people. Even successful people obviously did that a lot of the time. Where people really struggle when it comes to communicating with failure is about talking about failure that they themselves were responsible for, right? So people can say, "Oh, I failed because I didn't, the financial crisis happened, or I failed because of the pandemic." And these are legitimate, right? Like if you're a business in the US and you're going gangbusters and then all of a sudden you were completely closed down, well, you couldn't have planned for that. There's no risk register that you put together that goes, "Oh yeah, global pandemic," right?
Yeah,
that's not your fault. But but it does cover a lot of things, right? So one of the things that's been really convenient about the pandemic is that if you fail, it's easy to attribute it to the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And so no one is judging you for failure in the 2020, 2021 era because they know the environment sucks, right? And they know that there's a high degree of uncertainty and things are beyond people's control. And so that has allowed people to talk about failure a bit more, but not necessarily in the way that people need to. People can say, "Well, I failed at this," and people will just instinctively be sympathetic, be like, "Oh yeah, COVID is," like people will fill in the blanks themselves.
But I think people don't want to talk about failure because I think it's part of their identity, like who they, again, like defected thing, like the defect, like it's who they are, right? It's like they failed something, like, "Oh my god, it's because I am a failure. It's not because I failed, I am it." Yeah,
I think that's really insightful, and that is the difference between guilt and shame. Shame is that I am this. Shame is what you are. So if you say I am a failure, that's something that people find very hard to communicate, even with close friends. And usually they don't even say that to close friends. It's something that close friends have to discern, not that they're a failure, but that they feel that way. Because they know them really well. And then they might be able to have that discussion because they know them very well. Whereas, online, where everyone is projecting endless success and they go, "Oh, I've just done this wonderful trek across the Andes," or whatever. And people are living these exciting lives and pursuing their dreams and, kicking goals in all kinds of career development and so on. In fact, there's a lot of space in between that, which is suffering and humanity and problems that we all have. And no small part of that is a feeling of being a defective person, heightened to no end if you perceive everyone else around you being successful. So the pandemic has been good in the sense of like, there's that leveling, like everyone knows that everyone's kind of struggling, right? So people are a little bit more open, I guess, but not in the way that you've just said, that they go, "Okay, well, I can externalize my problems because the whole world sucks. So if my life sucks, it's because the world sucks," rather than acknowledging those areas of one's life where they have problems in their own behavior and their own psychology and their own emotions and their own traumas and all the vicissitudes of humanity that we all deal with, and the fact that we project a vision of success on that thin ice that we all skate on every day. that does limit our ability in a internet medium to connect. Yeah, so camera just cut out with the end of the card that we had, but I think it is a really good segue into what will be our other topic of today, which is the OnlyFans video that I did, where people are yearning for connection and are paying money for that as a commodity. And people have been intuitively and instinctively kind of disgusted by that or averse to it, and I think both in terms of the behavior itself, but also what it means for the culture, which we need to face up to, and that is that the internet has failed, right? The internet has failed. The mission of the internet was to connect people, and if the only way in which millions of people around the world feel connected is if they pay someone for attention, then that is that's outside the realm of our understanding. I mean,
it's kind of weird, right? Like, before our conversation, I thought to myself, yeah, who the hell would pay for connection? Lonely people. But then, as we discuss more about social media, the nature of the internet, I was like, it's actually not that surprising. Like, of course I would pay. Like, it's because there is no connection on other platforms. Like, there is no way to have that one-on-one and, feel accepted for who you are. Yeah.
It's, you're paying for validation that,
and disproportionately, men might not get that validation because women get it all the time online. They're like, oh, you're so cute, so hot, like, and without being like, I'm being serious, like on constant photos.
I'm not.
Like,
I'm smirking at the truth of what you're saying, not at what you're saying.
Like when a guy posts a photo, you were like, oh, nice shirt, mate. It's like getting a bit old there, right? Or something stupid, right? And like, yeah, whatever. But when a girl, like when I have a profile picture, and it's very telling, right? When I'm in it with Tim's my boyfriend. When I'm with Tim, like his likes shoot up. Just saying. Because I'm in it. Like, not to be egoistic, but I'm serious. It is like, I'm being serious. Like,
I know.
You're laughing because it's so true.
Yes, I am laughing.
20 likes to 90. Like, it's disproportionate.
Yes, that's true. And I wonder whether that's just as bad. I mean, the women get their validation for how they look in a selfie in a way that transcends what people were afraid of when it came to magazines and beauty standards and things like that. Like that, it in order to very few women get that level of attention because they have profound insights that they want to share, right? Like it's all very visual, okay? Now that's fine in the sense that that's just our biology, right? Now I say this in a kind of cold, calculated way in the sense of biologically speaking, men are more visual, right? And women are more, without overgeneralizing, have a much more complicated way of finding things appealing and attracting. So a guy can look at an attractive woman and just smash that like button, right? Whereas
a girl would click at the profile and just kind of scroll a little bit and might, okay, I like that. No, I won't. I'm gonna move on.
Yeah, exactly. So
and I don't know why we do that. Yeah.
Well, no, it's actually it makes a lot of biological sense, right? In the sense that the cost to women for a sexual encounter is much, much higher. So a guy has an endless renewable resource for which is totally inexhaustible and always replenishes. So he has to care about one thing and one thing alone: is she fertile? Okay, from a biological, reproductive, evolutionary, billions of years of animal kingdom stance, that's the only consideration he has. Whereas a woman has a much more complicated and risky decision to make, because she's born with the only eggs she'll ever have, and she has a period of extensive dependency if she falls pregnant. So there is a huge risk if you have a sexual encounter. Like, we live in an age of contraception and all this sort of stuff. But you have to don't think about it in terms of the last few decades. Think about it in the last 200,000 years. Okay, if a woman has a sexual encounter, there is a high likelihood that she will fall pregnant, right, at some point if she has them over multiple weeks or whatever. And thus, what does that mean? Well, it means months of looking after and sharing of space with another growing individual. Then, because of the fact that the human brain is so much larger relative to most other mammals of their body type, a woman has to give birth prematurely, right? So a 9-month gestation for a human species is actually really short, given what kind of development goes on there. And why is that the case? Because a woman's hips haven't evolved in that arms race sufficiently to be able to carry a baby that's 2 years old, right? And so you give birth that's premature. What's the cost of that? The cost of that is that baby is utterly dependent on the mother for all things. If you've got a gazelle that's born, it washes itself off, shakes its head, and then starts running away from a lion. It's fine, right? Whereas a human baby is utterly dependent for many years, okay? Yeah. And because of the complexity of our modern world, that dependency will often last in these days even into adulthood. So that cost is just enormous, and a guy can just piss off, right? Like, it's not socially encouraged, but it is an option that he has, whereas women do not have that option as a general rule. So of course, a woman isn't just going to look at a photo and be like, okay. She's going to be like, let's dig a little bit and use my highly developed sense of evolutionary preservation to see whether this guy meets the range of criteria. One, reproductive health, so is he good looking and all of that, but also, is he likely to stick around? Is he capable of providing? Am I going to be able to be dependent and vulnerable for an extended period of time? Can I trust this situation? And so much of the human drama that exists between men and women is because of that fact. Men are much more simple creatures. In that sense, they're they're much more complicated in other areas, as we're finding out in terms of this connection. One of the things I did not address in the OnlyFans discussion was that guys have a protective instinct, right? So just like women have a vulnerable instinct of okay, I've got to nurture this infant. Guys have an instinct to be okay, I need to protect this vulnerability so that my offspring have a good chance of survival. It's not, I'm reducing it to biological terms, but in the OnlyFans space, women get to express gratitude to a man who is providing. Now he's providing money, and that money is helping her to live, right? Without that money, her standard of living would be much worse. So he does get that by providing that. And this is one of the things that I think is really pernicious about the modern world when women, and I mean this in the sort of extreme feminist space, kind of are constantly worried about men providing and being taught that if a man gives something, he expects something in return.
My mom tells me that all the time.
That's not true. Well, he does expect something. He expects communication, right? If he buys you if he buys you dinner, right, he expects you to talk to him, right? Right. So that's an expectation. But does he expect you to sleep with him? No, that's not generally what a guy is expecting, right? He might be hoping in the back of his mind, but it's not like it's not like, oh, I've bought you dinner, now you have to come back to my place. That is definitely not what's going through his head. He is demonstrating a willingness to share of his bounty, if you like, in order to show his willingness to protect and preserve. Okay. And one of the things that giving money to a woman on the internet who's communicating with him and being nice to him, one of the things that does is make him feel like he's saving and preserving and protecting this individual, because in a way he actually is, right? So there is a
No wonder it's so like ethically right.
Oh yeah, and look, there's something about this that I think is it's much more clear cut. I think in Eastern European relationships, I come back to this, so they're much stricter in these gender roles.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think that's a good thing either. There are problems with that, but one of the positives is that there is an understanding about this. Like, people are cognizant of the fact that men have a protective instinct and they feel that need to be protective, whereas in the West, that gets translated into so-called toxic masculinity and patriarchy and all this kind of stuff that makes men feel really ashamed of themselves and so on. But this is a natural instinct, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's actually something that has kept the human race alive through the eons. Unfortunately, it's being commoditized in this way. So there's so much about humanity that is irrational. Like, it's not rational for a man to feel protective of a woman he doesn't know on the internet and who in all likelihood is going to be fine. It's irrational, but it is natural. It is a natural instinct, just like a mother's natural instinct. It's not rational. Like, if a woman loses her child somewhere and the child is lost and she's trying to find it, the woman will not be behaving rationally, right? No. She's not going to sit there and be like, okay, well, here are the mathematically most likely. She's going to freak out.
Yeah,
okay?
Of course.
And so it's not rational, but it is natural. And there are the whole range of things about humans that do that. And the internet has been uniquely bad at catering to that distinction. Yeah. So the OnlyFans thing, I think, is it's not a problem in the sense that it's unique to something we've never seen before. I think what it's doing,
good in terms of like providing a platform for those already engaged in porn, because if I'm being serious, like if you work in the sex industry, it's a scalable area. Like, you can have way more clients in that space, and like you're doing exactly the same job but getting paid more, so you don't have to pay a levy when you go out and in the clubs or whatever. So
it's physically safer.
It's physically safer. Like, yeah, there are more precautions out there. There's like a lot of benefits I see for those. But in terms of, relationship building and having a human connection, like, I think it does fall short. It is meeting, I guess, a need, but I don't know what the cost benefit is, at the cost of what? At the cost of having a fake connection or not being able to connect with people in real life, or compromising yourself to having actual real human connection, or change your expectations of the opposite gender.
Yes, I mean there's one sliver of positivity I can think of, right, for the guy, okay, which is that for some men, probably a minority, but for some men it might help them get some confidence when it comes to talking to women. Like, if you're paying someone for attention and you just know they're going to respond to you, and you might even ask the person that you're paying money to, like, look, what advice would you give, blah blah blah, and you got someone who's listening to you and can kind of understand your problems and so on, and you'd be like, look, if I wanted to go and get a real relationship in real life, what sort of things would you say I do, and you know me, blah blah blah. There is that opportunity to self-improve, right? And you might be like, and you might feel like you might have these people who grow to hate women because they are not getting any attention from them and feel that they're shallow and blah, blah, blah. And they're all getting their likes on Instagram and everything. And they may develop a sense of resentment for not getting that attention. If instead of having that resentment, they pay money to get that attention, and then that is a catalyst for them to be like, it's like an antidepressant that allows them to then move on. Like, I get it, but that allows them to then go and have more real connections, then that's a good thing. It might be something that gets people out of that rut. But I would suspect that's for a minority. On balance, what OnlyFans has exposed is not that this is a new thing of like we have to be really frightened of. What it's exposed is that the internet as a whole has failed to do what it meant to do. It's a symptom. It's a symptom of the fact that people got online hoping to connect and they failed to do that. And people have now, mighty capitalism has
it's always that
has managed to expose that hypocrisy.
So, word of advice: don't get on it. If you're already on it, do what Crispin said. use
it as a catalyst for self-improvement. Like I'm not going to tell you to stop doing something
that's true,
that you are enjoying. And if there were no benefits to it, people wouldn't be doing it, right? So there's got to be something you're getting out of it. But if you are an OnlyFans subscriber and you're using it hopefully to go, okay, look, I actually do want to get into the dating market and I do want to have real life. Maybe this connection will give me the confidence and the pointers and the direction to actually do that. So, best of luck to you.
Yeah, I think so. I think it definitely reflect on like the why. Reflect on why you choose to go on these platforms, But not just OnlyFans, on every platform. Like, why are you on Facebook? The only reason I'm really on Facebook is for Facebook Messenger. I believe that Facebook has gotten increasingly fake that I'm like, yeah, I'm never on it. Like, really, I'm on it for like to make events pages because everyone's already on it, so it's easy to organize events and then connect with my friends if I don't have their phone number. Apart from that, no. And then Instagram, I did a little experiment. I've been off Instagram. My account's still there, but I haven't engaged with it at all for the past couple of weeks. Didn't get a message from my friends wondering where I am, so I'm like, well, I don't need this. But it was a way for me to looking at my why. I don't know why I spent so much time on it. Like. It was a way for me to validate my looks maybe, or like the lifestyle that I think I want to project in the world, to be honest. And it wasn't healthy. And it took up a lot of my time. Now, like, again, like at the beginning of this podcast, I got my Cert 3 and it took me 2 years, but I did the majority of the work in the last 2 months.
Yeah, but you were doing an entire
I know, but
entire honours degree for which you got first class and all of that. So
but like,
this is not.
There's still pockets in
you
there.
had
like,
a list of priorities.
Yeah, but there's still pockets in there, right? I mean, you're just scrolling and absolute scrolling. So I think it's healthy for people to just reflect on like why you choose a thing, and it's okay. It's okay to engage in these social media things. Just be really, clear with yourself, like why. Be more. I think it's healthy to be self-aware. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well,
I think we've talked about some pretty important topics today. So not much in the comic relief space, but that's okay. I think this is much more important and is happening now, and is something that's a major part of everybody's life that we're all going to have to deal with, not just as individuals but also collectively as a community. So do give us your thoughts on this. How do you feel about the way in which social media companies are operating? How does that relate to our own connectedness, our own feelings of shame? Have you had any experiences with OnlyFans? By all means, leave them down below. No one's going to like shame you or whatever. I'm really interested in what you have to say. If you do have either a creator or a subscriber accounts, that'd be really interesting. You tell us what you get out of this stuff. And that's pretty much for me.
Pretty much it. Definitely. Like I think it is a very important topic, and this is something we are going to have to live with. Like you said, live with the rest of our lives. So
which means we'll cover here for sure. So subscribe.
Yeah, like and subscribe. Enjoy. We have other videos as well talking about this topic. So censorship. We will start linking actually our videos down below. But thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.